The night sky spread itself out like black velvet, scattered with silver lights. But none of that brilliance reached the penthouse on the 40th floor of the glass tower. Inside, the air was heavy, pressed down by silence broken only by the faint hum of the city far below. The walls gleamed with expensive art and polished marble. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed Chicago's skyline as if it were a trophy display. But the room itself felt colder than the winter wind outside. Emily sat at the dining table, her back straight, her hands folded together on the smooth mahogany surface. The table seemed large for two people. 5 years earlier, she and Richard had filled it with laughter and late-night dinners. Promises of family and legacy whispered between them. Tonight, it was an arena. Richard Thompson sat across from her, his tie loosened, his silk shirt uncreased despite the long hours at his firm. A glass of scotch sat untouched near his elbow. Next to a stack of merger documents he had tossed aside. His eyes, the same piercing blue that had once melted her heart in the Yale Law Library, now looked through her as though she were a failed case file. 5 years, he said flatly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. 5 years of nothing. Emily felt the word slice at her chest. She took a deep breath, steadying her voice the way she had taught her law students to do in heated debates. Richard, the doctor said we need more tests. We don't know. He slammed his palm against the table, and the crystal glasses shivered. In their stems, I don't need tests. Every man in my family has children. My father, my grandfather, my cousins. It isn't me. Her throat tightened, but she pressed forward. That's not how science works, Richard. You're an attorney. You pride yourself on logic. You can't just presume logic. He laughed, but the sound was hollow. The logic is this. I'm wasting time. Do you know what the firm is worth today? $50 million? And who am I going to leave it to? Emily. Who will inherit everything I've built? Her composure faltered, pain breaking through her controlled voice. So this is about heirs. About your empire, not about us. Richard stood suddenly, his Italian suit catching the light, making him look every inch the powerful man he had fought to become. It's about my future. I need someone who can give me children. Emily's tears brimmed, threatening to spill. And if it's you, Richard, if you're the reason, his eyes flashed with anger. There's nothing wrong with me. The words echoed in the vast room. He grabbed his briefcase from the chair, his movements precise, almost rehearsed. The papers will arrive tomorrow. You can keep the condo. Her voice cracked as she whispered, I can't believe you're doing this. It's better this way. You can move on. Find someone who can. His sentence faded, but he did not look back. His phone rang, and in an instant he was already answering, his tone smooth, professional, talking mergers and millions as he strode to the door. When the door closed, the silence roared. Emily sat frozen, staring at the untouched Scotch glass, and the dent his palm had left on the polished table. The skyline glittered behind her, indifferent to her crumbling world. She reached for their wedding photo on the wall, the one where she had worn a simple white dress and he a sharp designer suit. They had looked so young, so certain. With trembling fingers, she took it down and placed it face down in a drawer. Her whisper broke the silence, soft but steady, a vow to herself. Genetics, we'll see, Richard. And in that moment, the cold penthouse belonged to her alone, stripped of illusions, filled instead with the quiet strength of a woman who would not let a man's arrogance define her worth. The morning light filtered through half-drawn blinds, casting long pale streaks across the bedroom. The other side of the bed was empty, the closet already half stripped of suits and shirts. Richard's absence carved into the very air. Emily sat at her vanity, still in yesterday's clothes, her face pale, her eyes rimmed with red. On the polished surface lay a single envelope, the divorce petition, delivered by courier as promised. The bold lettering of her name glared at her like an accusation. She didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, she reached for her phone. The clinic's number was already in her call log. Her voice wavered, but she forced herself to sound firm. Yes, this is Emily Thompson. I'd like to schedule an appointment for my test results. A pause. Yes, I'll come alone. That word alone rang in her chest long after she ended the call. By mid-afternoon, she sat in the sterile quiet of Dr. Chen's office, hands clenched in her lap. The faint hum of a wall clock ticked away the silence until the doctor entered. Holding a thin folder, Mrs. Thompson, Emily, she corrected softly. The name Thompson already felt foreign. Dr. Chen adjusted her glasses, her voice calm, but deliberate. Emily, your results came back completely normal. Hormone levels excellent. No medical barrier to conception. She slid the papers across the desk. Highlighted numbers glared like proof of a truth long denied. Emily stared at the documents until her vision blurred. A flood of emotion searched vindication. Sorrow, fury. Richard had demanded she carry the shame alone. He had thrown her away without ever looking for the truth. So it was never me, she whispered, voice trembling. The doctor hesitated, her professionalism softening into compassion. Statistically, given your results, there is a strong possibility. The fertility factor lies with your husband. Husband. The word stung. Emily closed the folder and held it tight against her chest as though it were both weapon and shield. That evening she did something she had not dared in months. She walked into Richard's office building. The receptionist blinked in surprise. When she announced herself, after a tense wait, Richard emerged from a glass-walled conference room, laughter still lingering from some corporate victory. The moment his eyes fell on her, his expression hardened. In his office, the city spread behind him like a kingdom. He leaned against his desk, impatient. If this is about the settlement, Emily placed the folder on the desk between them. These are my results. I'm perfectly capable of having children. The problem was never me. Richard glanced at the folder, but didn't open it. His jaw tightened. So now I'm the problem? This isn't about blame, Richard. It's about truth. A truth you were too afraid to face. His voice dropped to a growl. Do you expect me to crawl back, beg you to forgive me? That will never happen. She stared at him, and for the first time saw not the brilliant attorney who had once charmed her, but a man so caged by pride he would rather burn his marriage than confront the possibility of his own imperfection. I don't expect anything, she said softly, not anymore. As she turned to leave, his voice chased her like a cold wind. The divorce papers, have you signed them? Emily paused at the door, her back to him. Yes, your empire is safe, but you should know, Richard, your legacy isn't. She walked out without looking back, the sound of her heels sharp against the marble floor, each step severing another strand of the life they had built. That night, alone in her new apartment, she opened the folder again. Her reflection wavered in the glass of the window as she whispered to the city below. I will not let his arrogance decide my future. She powered up her laptop and opened the fertility clinic's website. Options unfolded across the glowing screen. Owner profiles, procedures, choices she had once imagined making with him, now hers alone. Her hand hovered over the mouse. Fear and freedom battled in her chest. She clicked. The path ahead was uncharted, but it was hers. For the first time in years, she felt something like power returning to her bones. The silence of the empty apartment no longer felt suffocating. It felt like a canvas. And somewhere in the depths of her determination, a thought flickered with the force of a vow. If he casts me aside for not giving him an heir, I will give myself something far greater. A family built not on his conditions, but on love, on truth. The glow of the laptop screen was the only light in Emily's small apartment. Outside, the Chicago streets pulsed with neon and restless traffic, but inside there was only silence, broken by the soft click of her mouse. On the fertility clinic's portal, hundreds of donor profiles scrolled before her eyes like faceless possibilities. Each line carried weight, height, eye color, education, hobbies, clinical words that carried the promise of something extraordinary. Life. Her chest tightened. This wasn't how she had imagined it. Years ago, she had pictured herself and Richard picking paint swatches for a nursery, arguing about baby names, laughing about who the child might look like. Now here she was, alone, deciding the future with a stranger's statistics. Yet for the first time, she wasn't crushed by the loneliness. She was fueled by it. Her hand froze on one profile. Donor, 8,742, Ivy League educated, dark hair, blue eyes, tall, ambitious, a lover of law and classical music. She leaned back in her chair, her breath unsteady. The resemblance to Richard was uncanny. Was it fate, coincidence, or something deeper? Her own subconscious choosing what felt familiar? Her sister Olivia's voice echoed in her head from there. Last conversation, don't let him haunt your choices, Em. But Emily wasn't choosing Richard. She was choosing a child who might move through the world without questions, without whispers of difference. She clicked select, her finger trembling. A single choice. Yet it shifted the ground beneath her life. Weeks later, she lay on the examination table, the air cold and antiseptic, the walls painted in muted blues meant to soothe. Dr. Williams, kind and steady, guided her through each step. "Take a deep breath," the doctor murmured. Emily obeyed, closing her eyes as the procedure began. She thought of the years of failure, of Richard's voice accusing her of being broken. She pushed the memory away, replacing it with a whisper of hope. "This is mine alone, the following." Days were filled with anxious waiting. Every ache, every flutter in her body felt like a question mark. She went to work, taught her students about constitutional rights and human dignity. But inside she carried a secret storm, until one morning, 2 weeks later, when a faint pink line on a pregnancy test changed everything, her knees buckled, tears flooding her eyes. Joy and terror clashed violently inside her chest. She pressed the test to her heart and whispered, "I did it. We did it." Her first ultrasound was supposed to be routine. She sat on the table again, gown tied loosely. Heart racing, the room hummed with machines. The lights dimmed. Dr. Williams pressed the wand gently against her abdomen, and the grainy image flickered onto the screen. Emily stared, her breath caught. "There's one," Dr. Williams said, her voice calm. Then she paused, moved the wand, and "There's two." Emily's pulse skyrocketed. Twins. She laughed nervously, tears streaming down her face. But then, Dr. Williams moved the wand again. "Wait, Emily. There are three." The world tilted. 3 tiny sacs glowed faintly on the screen, each holding a flicker of life. "Triplets," Emily whispered, the word tasting foreign in her mouth. She pressed her hand to her abdomen as though to steady herself. "3. Dr. Williams nodded, her tone still professional, though her eyes softened with understanding. "It's unusual, but not impossible. The fertility medication likely stimulated multiple eggs. All 3 implanted successfully, and all 3 have strong heartbeats." Emily's eyes locked on the screen, unable to look away from the dancing lights. 3 heartbeats, 3 tiny promises. A sob broke from her chest, raw and uncontained. She was overwhelmed with awe, fear, and wonder all at once. One child she had prepared herself for. 3 felt impossible. Yet as she listened to those fragile rhythms, she knew she was already bound to them. That night, she sat on her balcony, the city lights flickering below like stars fallen to earth. The ultrasound image lay on her lap, her fingers tracing the outlines of the tiny lives. "Hello, my loves," she whispered. "I don't know how we'll manage. I don't know how I'll do this alone, but I swear I'll fight for you, all of you." In the quiet, her grief for what she had lost mingled with the breathtaking terror of what she had gained. Somewhere deep inside, a fire was lit. Richard had left her because she couldn't give him an heir. Now fate had given her 3, and they weren't his. They were hers, her children, her family, her legacy. As she leaned back, the wind tangling her hair, she realized something with stunning clarity. Life had not broken her, it had remade her. The rain came down in sheets that night, drumming against the university's old glass conservatory like 1,000 restless fingers. Emily stood beneath the dome, seeking shelter after a lecture cancellation had left her stranded with nothing but her thoughts and the weight of 3 growing lives inside her. She was 20 weeks pregnant now, her frame beginning to show. And though she carried herself with the same composure she used in her classroom, the truth was she often woke in the night gripped with fear. 1 child had seemed daunting enough. 3 felt like a mountain she wasn't sure she could climb. The echo of footsteps broke the solitude. She turned to see Dr. Nathan Miller, guest lecturer, medical ethicist, and increasingly, the one steady presence she hadn't expected. He was holding a folded umbrella, rainwater dripping onto his jacket. His salt-tan pepper hair was damp, but his smile was warm, a grounding contrast to the storm outside. "Looks like the weather forced a recess," he said lightly. Emily laughed, though her voice carried a nervous edge. "I suppose even academics need nature to remind us we're not in control." Their conversations had started professionally, debates after lectures, discussions about law and medicine, but slowly, steadily, they had bled into something more personal. Tonight, in the quiet hum of the conservatory, the air felt charged, as though something was waiting to be spoken. Nathan's gaze dropped briefly to her stomach, then returned to her face with respect rather than intrusion. "How are they?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then admitted, loud, demanding, "And they're not even here yet." A hand drifted unconsciously over her belly. "I thought I was prepared for one." 3. Feels like fate is mocking me. Or maybe fate is making sure you'll never feel empty again, Nathan said. His voice was calm, but his words sank deep. For a moment, Emily had to look away, blinking back tears that threatened to rise. Over the next months, Nathan became more than an occasional companion. He was there at appointments, always standing, just outside the curtain of the exam room, offering quiet reassurances. When Olivia couldn't make it, he sat with her in waiting rooms, distracting her with stories from his research on reproductive ethics and the absurdities of academic politics. He helped assemble cribs when the deliveryman dumped boxes in her living room, fumbling with Allen wrenches until they both collapsed in laughter on the floor, surrounded by screws they couldn't place. One late afternoon, Emily sat in a rocking chair in a half-finished nursery, her hands resting on the swell of her stomach. Nathan stood by the window, holding a stuffed animal he brought back from a conference, a soft brown bear with stitched eyes. "They'll need 3 of everything," he said, handing it to her. 3 cribs, 3 car seats, 3 times the patience, and 3 times the exhaustion, she murmured, hugging the bear to her chest. Then, more quietly, "Nathan, what if I can't do it? What if I'm not enough for them?" He crouched in front of her, meeting her eyes. "Emily, I've watched you face everything life threw at you and come out stronger. Those children don't need perfection. They need love. You already have that in abundance." Her throat tightened. No one, not even Richard, in all their years together had spoken to her with that kind of faith. The night she went into labor, the world seemed to tilt. The hospital lights were blinding, voices urgent, machines beeping in chaotic rhythm. Sweat poured down her temples as waves of pain crashed over her, 3 lives pushing to enter the world all at once. "Push, Emily. You're almost there," Dr. Williams urged. Her fingers clamped down on Nathan's hand so tightly he nearly winced, but he didn't let go. He leaned close, his voice steady. "You're not alone. I'm here." The first cry split the air. A boy. Minutes later, another, stronger wail. Another boy. Then a final, piercing cry. A girl. The room erupted with activity, nurses moving swiftly, doctors checking vitals. Emily's vision blurred with tears, but when the 3 tiny bundles were placed near her, her exhaustion dissolved into, Alexander, she whispered to the firstborn. "Benjamin," she said to the second, brushing her lips over his forehead. "And Charlotte," she breathed, gazing into the eyes of the smallest, her daughter's fingers curling instinctively round her thumb. Nathan's voice was thick with emotion as he said, "They're perfect, Emily, all 3 of them." The sterile delivery room transformed into sacred ground, where exhaustion and pain gave way to something transcendent. 3 fragile lives had arrived, not as Richard's legacy, but as Emily's triumph. Later, in the quiet of her private room, the triplets swaddled beside her. Emily looked up to see Nathan standing watch, his shoulders slumped with fatigue, but his eyes shining with something. She hadn't expected to see devotion. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking, "for being here, for everything." He shook his head. "No thanks needed. It's a privilege to be part of this." Emily leaned back, tears spilling freely now, overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. For the first time in years, she wasn't defined by Richard's rejection or her own fears. She was defined by the 3 small heartbeats that had become her life and by the man who had chosen to stand beside her in the storm. And though she didn't know what their future together might look like, she knew one thing with certainty: she was no longer alone. The years did not pass quietly. They moved like a tide, sometimes crashing with sleepless nights, sometimes carrying Emily forward on gentle waves of laughter and love. 10 years had slipped by since the night she whispered 3 names into the sterile air of the delivery room. Alexander, Benjamin, and Charlotte were no longer fragile bundles wrapped in swaddling cloths. They were living, breathing whirlwinds of energy and curiosity, shaping her days and giving rhythm to her nights. The house that once felt too quiet now pulsed with life. Mornings were chaos, cereal bowls half finished, shoes mysteriously disappearing, Charlotte insisting on packing her art portfolio in her backpack, while Benjamin darted across the living room, pretending to be a superhero. Alexander, the eldest, by 2 minutes, always tried to keep order, reminding his siblings of the clock, insisting that dinosaurs needed to be shared fairly, that their science projects had to be handled carefully. Nathan had long since ceased to be a guest in their lives. He had become their anchor. To the triplets, he was simply Dad. He walked them to school, read bedtime stories with dramatic voices, and explained the mysteries of the world with the patience of both a scholar and a parent. He had married Emily when the triplets turned 1, and 6 months later he legally adopted them. That single act, signing his name on their birth certificate, sealed what the children already knew. Love, not blood, made a father. Emily, too, had grown. No longer the fragile woman who once sat in a cold penthouse, crushed by rejection. She had flourished into a figure of quiet strength. She was now a respected department chair at the university, her name printed on academic journals, her lectures quoted by students across the country. Yet her greatest pride was not the awards that lined her office shelves, but the chaos that filled her kitchen every morning. And yet, despite the happiness, shadows sometimes crept in. When Alexander frowned, the angle of his jaw mirrored Richard's. When Benjamin tilted his head, the set of his blue eyes carried a ghost of the man who had abandoned Emily years ago. And when Charlotte laughed, a flicker of resemblance reminded Emily of a life she had fought to bury. Most days, she pushed the thoughts away, but they always lingered like fingerprints on glass. One evening, as the children sprawled on the living room floor, Charlotte painting, Alexander bent over a science kit, Benjamin bouncing a ball off the wall, Nathan sat beside Emily on the couch, slipping his arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked softly. Emily stiffened. "Richard?" He nodded. His voice wasn't accusatory, only thoughtful. "I see the resemblance sometimes, and I know one day the kids might notice it too. We should be ready for their questions." Emily exhaled slowly, staring at the 3 heads bent in concentration on the floor. "I've dreaded that day for years, but you're right. We'll tell them the truth when the time comes. That they were chosen, not abandoned. That love raised them, not pride." Nathan kissed her temple, his presence steady, "and they'll believe it, because it's true." But even as he spoke, Emily felt unease coil in her stomach. She remembered Richard's words in that penthouse, the way he had sneered at the idea of being at fault. He had vanished from her life, but not from the world. Richard Thompson was not the kind of man who faded quietly. Her fears proved right sooner than she imagined. It began with a news article that popped up on her university's website, announcing the upcoming law school alumni gala. She scrolled absently, half distracted by the triplets bickering over who got the last cookie. Then she froze. His name, his face, Richard Thompson, Distinguished Alumni Achievement Award. His photo stared back at her, older now, silver streaking his hair, but his confident smirk unchanged. Her heart pounded. 10 years had passed since she last saw him. 10 years since she had walked out of his office with her fertility results clutched like a shield. She thought she had buried him in the past, but the past had a way of climbing back to the surface. She closed the laptop quickly, forcing her face into a mask of calm before the children noticed. But that night, long after the house had gone quiet, she stood at the window, staring into the Chicago skyline. She whispered into the glass, "Stay away, Richard. Please, stay away." But fate was already moving its pieces. A week later, Emily boarded a flight to New York for a reproductive rights conference, leaving Nathan in charge of the children. She kissed each child goodbye, promising to be home in 3 days. She never returned. The call came hours later. An accident. A delivery truck running a red light. A taxi crushed beneath its weight. Nathan sat in the pediatric waiting room, his phone pressed to his ear, the world tilting as the doctor's voice confirmed the unimaginable. Emily was gone. The funeral was held at the university chapel, filled to the doors with colleagues, students, and friends. The triplets sat in the front row, clinging to Nathan's hands, their faces wet with tears they didn't understand how to control. And at the very back, unnoticed by most, sat Richard Thompson. He had not planned to come, but when the news of Emily's death reached him, something in his chest had tightened, something he had spent years ignoring. He came for closure, or so he told himself. But when the family walked in, when he saw the 3 children with their solemn faces and unmistakable blue eyes, the ground fell out from under him. The boys and a girl, 10 years old. They carried his features as though fate had carved them directly from his blood, his breath caught in his throat. For the first time in decades, Richard Thompson, the man who commanded courtrooms and corporations, felt powerless. And in that moment, sitting in the shadows of a chapel filled with grief, he realized the cruel irony. The heirs he had craved, the legacy he had destroyed his marriage to find they had existed all along, but they weren't his. Not in the ways that mattered. Still, the thought gnawed at him like a blade. They looked just like me. The chapel air was heavy, thick with the weight of grief and whispered prayers. Rain tapped softly on the stained glass windows, as if even the sky mourned. Candles flickered along the aisle, casting halos of light across bouquets of white lilies and roses. At the front, Emily's photograph rested on an easel, her warm smile captured in a moment of joy that now seemed cruelly eternal. Nathan stood beside the casket, his hand resting on Alexander's shoulder. The boy's face was pale, his small jaw clenched as though holding back the flood inside him. Beside him, Benjamin's restless energy had drained into a twitching foot that tapped against the pew, his eyes darting anxiously from face to face. And Charlotte, caught between the steady composure of her brothers and her own storm of emotion, sobbed openly, clutching the stuffed otter her mother had given her years ago. Richard sat in the very back pew, unseen by most. His world had narrowed. The three small figures in the front row. Every time Alexander lifted his chin, Richard saw himself at that age, stubborn and proud. Every time Benjamin's eyes widened in restless curiosity, he saw the boy he had been before law had hardened. Him. And Charlotte, the curve of her cheek, the set of her mouth so eerily mirrored Emily that it pierced him deeper than any courtroom defeat ever had. The minister's words floated by about Emily's brilliance, her compassion, her fierce belief in justice. Colleagues spoke of her as a professor who shaped lives. Students spoke of her as a mentor who had seen their worth when others dismissed them. But Richard heard none of it clearly. He was trapped in a storm of recognition, disbelief, and something dangerously close to longing. When the service ended, the mourners filed past the family, offering condolences. Richard's legs moved of their own accord, carrying him closer, his pulse hammering in his ears. And then he was there, face to face with the children who looked like echoes of his own blood. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly, his voice practiced, measured, the same tone he had used in court 1,000 times. But his eyes betrayed him, flickering to Alexander, then Benjamin, then Charlotte. Each child glanced back differently, curiosity in Alexander's gaze, suspicion in Benjamin's, grief in Charlotte's tearful eyes. Nathan's arm tightened around them instinctively. "Thank you for coming," he said with polite dismissal. His tone was controlled, but his eyes were wary, protective. Richard nodded and stepped back, but the image of those children seared itself into his mind like fire. He left the chapel, his umbrella shielding him from the rain, but not from the storm building inside his chest. 3 nights later, Nathan sat at the kitchen table, condolence cards spread before him. The house was unbearably quiet, the kind of silence that presses down until it suffocates. He was sorting mail when the doorbell rang. Too late for neighbors, too purposeful to be a mistake. He opened the door. Richard Thompson stood on the porch, his tailored suit immaculate despite the drizzle. 2 younger men flanked him, briefcases in hand, his blue eyes the same eyes Emily's sons carried were cold, but behind them burned something raw-eyed. Double quotes, "Dr. Miller," Richard said evenly. "We need to speak. It's urgent." Nathan's grip tightened on the doorframe. "My children are asleep." "That's precisely what we need to discuss," Richard replied. "Your children, or whether they are, in fact, yours." The words dropped like lead between them. Nathan stepped outside, shutting the door behind him. His voice was low, dangerous. "Not here. Not tonight." Richard's tone softened, but only slightly. "The resemblance is undeniable. The timing, our divorce, the births. It aligns. I believe those children are mine. They are Emily's," Nathan said firmly, "and mine. In every way that matters." One of Richard's lawyers stepped forward. "Mr. Thompson is prepared to petition for DNA testing. He has rights." Nathan's jaw tightened. Where were those rights when Emily was alone in a hospital room, giving birth to 3 babies at once? Where were they when she was awake at 3 a.m., exhausted and terrified, feeding them one by one? Where were they during school plays? Scraped knees, nightmares. His voice shook, but not with fear, with fury. "Parenthood is not claimed in a courtroom. It is lived, and you did not live it." Richard's composure cracked, his face pale with anger and something almost like shame. Still, he straightened. "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, University Medical Center. We will meet there, and you will hear what I have to say." For a long moment, Nathan considered slamming the door in his face, but he saw the lawyers. The storm Richard was willing to unleash. The children had just lost their mother. They could not withstand a legal war. "Tomorrow," Nathan said quietly, "but you will regret this." That night, Nathan sat by the children's beds, watching their small bodies rise and fall in sleep. He touched each forehead lightly, whispering promises they would never hear. Promises that he would protect them, that Emily's sacrifice would not be tarnished. His heart ached with fear and fury, but beneath it burned a steel resolve for all. Richard's money, his power, his arrogance. Nathan had something he never would: years of love. Memories etched into the fabric of 3 small hearts and Emily's trust. But still, as the night deepened, one truth clawed at Nathan: Richard was not going to walk away quietly. The storm was only beginning. The morning sky over Chicago was a flat, steel gray, the kind of color that carried no promises, only tension. The University Medical Center's conference room smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, its long table polished to a mirror sheen. Nathan sat alone at its head, a slim folder before him. He looked calm, but inside, his pulse thudded like a war drum. Today would decide whether the children, already bruised by grief, would be dragged into a battle that could tear their lives apart. The door opened. Richard Thompson entered with the confidence of a man who had never lost a case. 2 attorneys followed, their briefcases fat with documents. His tailored suit was impeccable, his silver-threaded hair combed with precision. But his eyes, those piercing blue eyes Emily's boys had inherited, betrayed the storm. Beneath his polished mask, "Dr. Miller," he said, his tone clipped, "I appreciate your cooperation." Nathan didn't rise. "I'm not here for you, Mr. Thompson. I'm here for Emily's children." The lawyer spread out papers with the speed of vultures circling prey. "Our client has reason to believe he is the biological father of Alexander, Benjamin, and Charlotte Jenkins." One began, "We intend to pursue court-ordered DNA testing, unless an agreement can be reached." Nathan's gaze didn't waver. He opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "Before you embarrass yourself further, you should read this." Richard's lawyer scanned it, frowning. "What is this?" "A certified donor agreement from Lakeside Fertility Clinic," Nathan replied. His voice was steady, but steel-laced. Every word. "Emily selected donor 8742, an anonymous donor. That donor signed away all parental rights in perpetuity." Richard's jaw clenched. "Anonymous? Convenient. You expect me to believe she didn't use material from our marriage, our years together, without my consent?" Nathan leaned forward, his voice low, cutting. "Emily begged you to be tested. You refused. She carried your blame alone while you walked away. She made her choice with the truth in hand. You were never part of it." Richard's face flushed, his hands tightening into fists. For the first time in years, the great Richard Thompson looked cornered. His lawyers exchanged wary glances, realizing their case was already unraveling. "You saw yourself in those children," Nathan continued softly, "but what you saw was Emily's mercy. She chose a donor with traits like yours, your hair, your eyes, so they wouldn't grow up facing questions. Not to honor you, but to shield them. They are not yours. They never were." For a long moment, silence thickened the air. Richard stared at the document, his certainty crumbling. He had walked in armed with arrogance, but now he sat exposed, confronted with a truth he could not spin or cross-examine away. "You don't understand," he said at last, his voice hoarse. "I spent my whole life building something, an empire. For what? For whom? I thought Emily. I thought she..." His words broke, uncharacteristically unfinished. Nathan's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Emily built her own legacy, and she did it without you. These children are loved, protected, and they are mine in every way that counts. Walk away, Mr. Thompson. Don't let your pride wound them." The way it wounded her, the attorneys shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson, legally speaking, the adoption holds. Pursuing this further will be unwise." Richard sat back, his shoulders sagging. The courtroom warrior was gone. In his place sat an old man, staring at a lifetime of hollow victories. For the first time, he understood what he had thrown away: not just Emily, not just children, but the chance to be more than his empire. 3 weeks later, Nathan received a letter addressed not to him, but to the Miller Children's Education Trust. Enclosed was proof of an endowment, $45 million, nearly half of Richard Thompson's fortune. The stipulation was clear: the children were never to know its source. Nathan read the letter in silence, his heart conflicted. This was not redemption, it was not love, but it was something, a final act of recognition. Too late for words, too late for apologies. Far from Chicago, Richard stood in his penthouse for the last time. The walls gleamed with art and luxury, yet the rooms felt colder than ever. He packed little, a warm briefcase, a coat fit for the Alaskan wilderness, and a single photograph Emily on their wedding day, smiling with a hope he had shattered. He touched her face on the glass, whispering into the emptiness, "I was wrong." Then he turned his back on the city he had conquered but never loved. Disappearing into a solitude he knew he deserved. Meanwhile, spring thawed Chicago. In the backyard of a house alive with laughter, Nathan knelt beside 3 children as they planted a memorial garden for their mother. Their small hands pressed seeds into the soil, their giggles rising like sunlight through grief. Charlotte wiped dirt on her cheeks like war paint. Benjamin insisted his seeds would grow fastest, and Alexander solemnly declared the garden would be a place of remembering. Nathan looked at them, at Emily's legacy blooming before his eyes. He felt her presence in the wind, in the earth, in the strength of the children's laughter. He whispered a promise meant for her, carried on the breeze. "They'll never forget you, and I'll love them enough for both of us." The garden flourished in the months that followed, a living monument not to the man who abandoned Emily, nor to the empire he built, but to the woman who chose love over pride and left behind a legacy, written in the hearts of her children. And somewhere, far away, Richard Thompson lived out his days in silence, haunted not by the fortune he had squandered, but by the sight of 3 children crying at a funeral, children who bore his features, but would never, in any lifetime, call him father.